Hello, dear community. A very warm welcome to our One Change a Week special with Markus Linder, impact and sustainability expert and founder of the impact startup Inoko. Today, we're gonna deal with a very interesting topic. We're gonna deal with the climate impact of refurbed and rented products, and are going also to talk about how to scale up your business. As such, we have two very interesting guests. I want also now to welcome Peter Wienishofer. He's founder of the startup Refurbed. Refurbed is a
Hey.
marketplace for refurbished electronics. And in March, they closed the Series A round of 16 million euros. And our second guest is Johan Jensen. He's Chief Product Officer of Grover. Grover brings the access economy to the consumer electronic markets by offering simply monthly subscription model. Grover has now a funding amount of 296 million euros. Before we go deep dive into the topic, I want to ask you, Markus, why we chose this topic today for One Change a Week.
Yeah, we chose this topic today because today we live in a society where, believe it or not, many people define themselves based on the tech gadgets they own, based on the devices they own. Many people out there will want to buy the newest iPhone or the newest tech product that's available in the market. But the problem with that is that buying a new device has quite a significant impact. So the building a new product represents 85 to 95% of the CO2 emissions of the overall CO2 emissions that a product will have within 2 years, which means you can recharge a mobile phone for 10 years to really get to the point where you reach the same emissions that your phone cost during the production process. And this calculation even doesn't take into account that raw earth need to be extracted from our planet, that there is a lot of biodiversity impact also involved, pollution during the production process of new technical devices, transportation, and so on. So the question for us is today, do we really always need to own the latest tech gadgets? Is it really so important for us that we are always the coolest kid on the block because of having the newest stuff, or are there other options out there? A new iPhone emits about 72 to 89 kilogram of CO2. These are the values for the iPhone 11. That corresponds to more than a flight from Vienna to Berlin. And it's quite a significant impact. So the good news is that there are different ways how to get access to devices that we need without having to have this negative impact by causing the production of a new product. And this is why I'm super excited to have two guests here today with us who are going to tell us more about how they're tackling this challenge and helping users to be more sustainable by helping them in a way that they don't need to buy the latest gadget, but can just either buy a refurbed product or rent the product they need.
So we're gonna talk about the impact, and before we're gonna talk about the impact, I also have an interesting question for both of you. Do you consider yourself as an impact startup? Maybe we can start with Peter.
Sure. So are we an impact startup? So we're definitely impact driven. So the mission of the company is to make refurbished products really well known. Our mission is actually to bring one refurbished product into every household in Europe. However, we sort of different than most, let's say, social enterprises, because we really focus on growth and we really focus on building a big company, because the core of our company is sustainability. Right, and for that since there's no difference between our sustainable goals and our company goals, we can fully focus on executing as a company. And that's sort of the beauty of our model, because we can, play with the same weapons as all the other, let's say, evil guys out there, and still have a very positive impact on the planet. That's why we like our model that much.
And Johan, do you consider yourself as an impact startup?
So we don't call ourselves as such. I guess impact driven is probably closer to the way we would see it. Essentially, the circular kind of business model is aligned exactly with what Grover does. So making sure that the inputs that go into these assets are recirculated and eventually recycled. So the idea here is to make sure that our business model aligns with the customer interests. And so, our mission is really to get for more people to get more out of life. And so we put the consumer kind of at the center. But in doing circular business, we're also kind of having that impact. And so we don't make it at the core, but it's kind of more of a side effect of what we do.
So you're impact driven and your customer is in the center. Markus, you also have an impact startup as well. You have the same definition, kind of.
It's interesting, and I'm not surprised that you both say that you're impact driven but not an impact startup, because impact startup sometimes has a little bit the connotation that these are small startups that are trying to solve like a big problem, but at a small scale. And for me, it's not that much about definition. I think we also sometimes have a bit of discussions internally. Do we want to call ourselves as an impact startup? Because impact startups are kind of in an aisle at the moment. But that doesn't matter. I think what all the three of us have in common is that we really have a globally scalable business model that really can hugely contribute to solving huge challenges that we have out there today. And so probably it's not that important how we call ourselves, but that we really at the core are trying to have an impact and are going to have an impact.
But to have an impact, you have to measure impact as well. So how you do it?
Very good question. In our case at Inoco, it's very much about helping consumers to consume in a more sustainable way. So we enable our consumers to track their grocery shopping, and we then let them know what the CO2 emissions were that were caused by their grocery products. And that makes it easy to measure for us, because we see what's the average CO2 emission of a user when they join us, and how is it developing over time. That's the way how we measure it. But it's a little bit early to tell you where we are trending here. But looks definitely promising at the moment. We see change at our users, that they're changing their purchasing behavior.
Peter, I also have a question for you, because you're planting trees as well as with refurbed for your customers and also for the climate. Do you measure your impact, or how do you measure it?
Sure. So overall, as a company, we basically have two key KPIs. The first one is the amount of CO2 we actually save through the refurbished products that we're selling versus if everybody would be buying new electronics. And the second one is exactly the trees, right? And the story behind it is actually that a refurbished product saves roughly 70% of the CO2 emission versus a new one, which is great, right? And even with the numbers that Markus said in the beginning, that means we're saving roughly 50 kilograms of CO2 with every refurbished product that we're selling. However, there's still 30% of the emissions going out in the air. And we as a company actually want to be CO2 negative. That means that we actually want to be better for the climate the bigger we get. And that's why we decided to plant the tree, because the tree actually more than compensates those remaining 30%. And so overall, we as a company have a negative balance for CO2, which means the bigger we get, the better it is for our planet. And what we achieved so far is we planted already more than 300,000 trees around the world in the last 3 years.
This is quite an achievement, definitely. Johan, CO2 reduction, how you consider CO2 reduction in your company?
Yeah, so we partnered with Advancing Sustainability and Circularity Capital, which was our lead investor in our Series A round, to come up with a methodology that would make sense for our model. So with Grover, there's multiple recirculation cycles. So on average, an asset on Grover gets recirculated 4 to 5 times. And so, with each cycle, there's a further reduction in e-waste and CO2 emissions, and those are the two metrics that we're looking at. So we're looking at e-waste saved, and then metric tons of CO2 saved due to these recirculation cycles. And so in terms of numbers, we've recirculated 150,000 assets, and at least once, so and usually multiple times. And then in terms of metric tons of CO2, we're looking at, since the beginning of 2017, 4,300 metric tons. So that's about 70,000 trees grown for 10 years. Or the other way of looking at it is about 200 garbage trucks full of e-waste that wasn't consumed. And on average, I mean, our products stay in circulation for 36 months. So what we're really trying to do is optimize the amount of times that these, or the amount of usage that these devices get before their end of life.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned you have a consumer-driven business model as well. How does the typical consumer looks like for Grover?
So it's actually kind of your average, German, Austrian, Dutch person. So those are the three countries that we're live in at the moment. Slightly higher income, high affinity for technology. We do see sustainability as one of the drivers and the reasons that people are using Grover, but it's not the major use case. Usually there's a need around, they see the value in being able to rent with the idea of upgrading. Or they don't think that financing is a good option for them because it commits them to a long-term purchase that they're not willing to make, and it gives them the flexibility to be able to switch or swap when it's relevant for them. So by putting the customer at the center, we're also kind of able to change customer behavior, but it also applies the same to manufacturers and retailers as well. So the customer for Grover isn't only the consumer itself, but also the retailers that we partner with and the manufacturers as well that we partner with.
Mm-hmm. And if it comes to generation, more younger or also older generations, this is a topic for you?
We typically, if we had to kind of have the average would be like a 34-year-old, but we have customers in their 80s, which is always surprising to see, and then we have customers all the way down to, I believe the age of 18 is the minimum for us. When we don't work with anyone under the age of 18.
Mm-hmm. Peter, are there any similarities if it comes to the user base for refurbed? Is it similar?
Yeah, definitely. It's very similar. I think one difference though is that we do have a lot of customers who really buy products from us because of the sustainability impact. For us, it's always a combination of price and sustainability, and luckily we see that more and more people really buy our products because of the sustainability aspect of refurbished products. And we're tracking that since more than 3 years now, and we see sustainability becoming more and more important. And even during Corona, where a lot of people say, climate protection is sort of dead now, we don't only care about Corona. That's actually not true when you look at the consumer behavior. It's actually the other way around. Sustainability is still on the rise, even though the media is not talking about it that much anymore. People know that we have to change, and they are changing.
Mm-hmm. So Peter mentioned the media is not talking that much anymore on the climate crisis. You also think this kind of way that like COVID is overruling now the climate crisis, Markus?
I think in the media to a certain extent, but I don't think it's dramatic. I think it's normal. I mean, we are in the middle of a huge crisis. We as humans tend to focus on what really impacts us in the short term, no matter whether something coming up in the long term is way more severe. That's the way how we are. So I think taking into account which crisis we are in at the moment, I'm pretty happy with the level of attention that the climate and biodiversity crisis are still getting. And obviously we are going to continue doing our best to make sure that the topic stays on top of mind. And
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, if it comes to consumer habits, do you think this is also a generation question, that younger generations are more open for the climate aspect?
I think that definitely the younger generations are in the lead, and that they are really pushing for change like no other generation before them did with regards to that topic. And that's great, but they also have a severe impact on their parents. And one of my co-founders is always telling the story that his son sometimes spends a weekend with his grandparents, and then he's calling him and telling him, "Oh no, it's so crazy. Our parents always wanna. Sorry, our grandparents always wanna." Go somewhere, around, and they're always taking the car, and he's really opposed to that. So the young generations are really then also influencing the older generations, and that gives me a lot of hope that also the older generations are going to play a big role in the change that we have to really make happen now.
We also want to talk about funding and also scaling up green business models. Peter, in the beginning I mentioned you closed the Series A round of 16 million euros in March. It was during COVID crisis. I was writing the article, I remember. So we were really surprised about that. Maybe you can give us some insights. What are the biggest challenges to scale up your business and also to do fundraising in this Series A round?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a crazy ride. We started the process at the end of last year. We very quickly had a couple of investors who were interested, and I saw this Corona crisis coming because I had a couple of friends in China because I studied in Shanghai. And it was, okay, this is going to come to Europe and it's going to be crazy. We need to be really fast in doing this deal. And we managed to get through the DD and everything super quickly. We had the date of the signature, and a day earlier the notary calls us. The whole notary office is closed because one of the notaries got actually Corona. It's like, fuck, what are we doing now? Luckily, we got somebody else, because it's actually not that easy in Vienna to get an English-speaking notary. There are only 5 in the whole city. Luckily, we got somebody else on that Friday, and then on Monday the lockdown started. So it was literally the last day we were actually able to sign the deal. So it was quite an emotional roller coaster, but we were very happy that we got out of it with a very positive ending. Obviously, afterwards, it was great for us because we could really focus on executing during the first lockdown and hiring a lot of people, and that helped us a lot in growing the company.
You are also now you also went to the German market with that money, I think so. You also invested also in marketing. How does it work on the German market right now?
So the German market was our first market to begin with. We actually launched Refurbed in Germany right away, and then only launched the AT domain a couple of months later. So Germany is by far our biggest market, and where we're also growing the fastest, both in absolute and relative terms. So it's going really well.
Are you right now also looking for another venture capital investment for a bigger round, Series P?
Yeah, I mean, we're always raising, right? So
always racing,
sure.
Okay.
We have big plans and we want to achieve them.
Definitely. Johann, I also want to come to Grover. You have a founding amount of 296 million euros. That's really amazing. What were the biggest challenges of scaling up your business?
I think, well, a lot of the innovation for Grover started really with financial engineering in the early days. So this was a novel way of leveraging capital to provide this access over ownership model. So the model existed for cars in the past. It's always existed for real estate, but it had never been done for consumer tech. And so, back in the early days of Grover in 2015, we worked with experts in debt financing to come up with a model that worked and it was scalable. And so we've essentially worked with various partners over the years, and we've shown that this model makes sense, and you know, the financing partners are generally very happy. So we've just kind of built on top of that success year after year, and our latest kind of debt financing round, which allows us to kind of deploy the capital to scale. As you know, it's just essentially grown with the success of our business, and so. But yeah, we've had some great partners along the way, and I think this is kind of becoming a proven model. And we're also starting to see, you know, other startups pop up here and there around the world using a similar financing model. So, which is good validation for what we're doing, but it also means that you know, we have some work to do to make sure that you know, we continue to lead in the market.
Mm-hmm. Markus, you are also now founded like Inoco. You're more in the early stage as well. So how you consider the circumstances here in Austria to found a startup as well, and then also go globally and scale up your business, because you made also like with Suvu really nice experiences already.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the great thing about founding in Austria is that Austria is so small and tiny that you need to think bigger from the first days on. So at Suvu, my first company, we tried to win customers in Austria and quickly figured out that every company in Austria is just way too small for the B2B SaaS product that we were offering. So we were kind of forced to go to Germany, and in the next step it became a little bit easier and clear that if we can go to Germany, we can probably also go to the UK or to the US. So that's the great thing about founding a company in a very small market, that you just kind of have this global mindset from the very beginning on. And in terms of the ecosystem, yeah, I think, you know, lots of positive things have happened over the last couple of years. Still many things to do, but I think things are moving into the right direction, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Austria is a good testing market?
Yes, I mean, in our case, we are going to test in Austria first because it's a small. So we've talking about Inoco now, because it's a small market. Also, we have a very high degree of the population already looking at sustainability topics. In Austria, we have, for example, more than 10% of the revenue share in the grocery area is organic products. So already 10% of the money that's spent in our supermarkets, it's spent on products that are more sustainable, which is a great validation point that consumers are willing to spend more to get a more sustainable product. And yeah, this is where we're going to start in Austria.
Mm-hmm. In One Change a Week, we also talk about changing habits as well. If you're talking right now about the topic today, refurbed and rented products, so what do you do in this kind of field in your daily routine?
Good question. First of all, I try to extend the lifetime of my devices as long as possible. So my iPhone is like more than 4 years old now, I believe. It's an iPhone 7 Plus. And instead of, you know, going for the latest device, I refurbed it, or had it refurbed in a local store, you know, getting a new battery, getting a new display, which is kind of a similar model, more do-it-yourself model, like Refurbed is offering it. And from a company perspective, we are also a customer of Refurbed, so we are going for refurbished products, and yeah, obviously trying to lift that ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I also want to ask this question to guests, what you're doing in your daily routine. Do you have like refurbed products, or are you using like rented products? Maybe Peter, I want to start with you. How old is your smartphone, by the way?
My smartphone is 1.5 years old and obviously refurbished.
Yeah.
So everything I own in terms of tech is obviously refurbished. Our whole company only uses refurbished products. Like all of our company's screens and laptops and obviously phones, obviously refurbished. I mean, we obviously use our own products. On top of that, it's much cheaper and much better for the environment. So there's also no reason for us to not do it anyways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think customers are changing their mindset as well? Because Markus mentioned now that many people want to go for the latest device as well. Do you think there's a change in the mindset also in society?
Yeah, I think there's a massive shift. I mean, especially if you look at the launch of the new iPhone 12, people don't care anymore, right? I mean, there are maybe 2 or 3 articles somewhere online, a couple of people read it, but there aren't these long queues in front of the Apple Store anymore, right? I mean, the Apple website isn't crashing anymore, and there aren't millions of orders in the first few days. So there are, of course, people who want to own the latest tech, but most people realize that the new iPhone 12 is basically the same as the iPhone 11, and that was basically the same as the iPhones before. The value for the consumer is becoming less and less of a new product because the features aren't that new anymore. And that obviously is it's also a great development for our planet because people don't need to have the latest gadgets anymore. It's fine if you have a phone that is 2 or 3 years old.
So Peter now mentioned people don't care about the newest iPhone 12. You agree on that, Johan?
I think because we have about 2,000 different SKUs on Brovo.com, so we're always looking at trends across different categories, and I think that is probably true for the iPhones, but across a lot of new categories like, say, I don't know, robotics or smart home, or innovation still is very relevant there. So if you look at it as part of a broader system of innovation in consumer electronics, new does matter, and it's always mattered, right? Technology is essentially what is new, and that's what drives demand. So I think the key is how do you build new in a more sustainable way, and the idea of throwaway tech, buying something on Amazon that won't last very long, or building something that has planned obsolescence, like the iPhones do or did. That's definitely the wrong way to go about it. And so that's where manufacturers have to think about things a little bit differently if they want to continue to compete, given the way that I think policy, regulators are trying to change the rules of the game as well, which is fantastic because we're starting to see the World Economic Forum discuss these topics. You have the European Green Deal, which is also telling the manufacturers and the retailers how they can do business, and so this is a really good. This is going to shape also consumer demand. I think it's a bit of a give and take, right? But I'm very optimistic about the shifts that are happening in consumer behavior. I used to work with the UN Environment Agency for 5 years, based out of Kenya, and so these topics are really dear to my heart. But it's really important to look at like the bigger system in which it operates, because consumer demand is based on so many things. But putting the responsibility on the individual is a little bit a narrow way to look at it, because there's so many other factors that affect kind of the consumer behavior and the market.
Markus, you also talked about CO2 reduction as well. What do you do in your own company for CO2 reduction?
What do we do in our own company? It's many small things, from, first of all, asking our co-working space to switch to renewable energy, which was an important step, obviously. Or we do things like taking care about which coffee we buy, to ensure that the coffee we buy has the least possible impact from a CO2, but also biodiversity impact. It's about the food that we order, for company events, team events. It's a very broad and many small things that we look after.
I also want to hand over this question to Peter and Johan. Peter, so what do you do in your own company for CO2 reduction?
Yeah, of course, similar to what Markus said. Obviously, we're running fully on renewable energy, and on top of that, what is actually sort of the biggest driver in terms of CO2, one thing is that none of our employees is coming by car, right? Everybody is taking public transport, and if we look at the CO2 balance of a company, this is sort of one of the biggest emitters of CO2, and we're very happy that we actually are able to provide a very good location of our office so that everybody can come. with public transport and that it's accessible for everybody. And apart from that, in terms of CO2 emittance, we have actually very, very little CO2 produced through our operations. There's basically none. Our servers are running on renewable energy as well. So there is basically no relevant CO2 impact that is produced through us as a company.
Johan, what do you do at Grover?
I think similarly, I mean, transportation being kind of, the biggest cost with Corona, that's changed a lot since very few people are coming to the office. Our office is right next to the S-Bahn at Janowitzbrücke in Berlin. So it's very easily accessible for everyone to come from different parts of the city. It wasn't a big thing, but it was a small kind of move in the right direction. We always had water bottles at the office, and because it's kind of a cultural thing in Germany. I think that a lot of people, you have your sparkling water and the little individual bottled water. And we replaced that last year with essentially water fountains, so that people could still have their sparkling water, but you didn't have to use as much plastic. So, little things like that the company tries to engage in. But I think it goes back to the individualization of responsibility, where there are certain things that individuals can take, but at a larger scale, I think it's important that we think of the broader system and create incentives for the larger players to also adapt.
Little steps matters, definitely. Thank you very much, Peter and Johan, and also Markus, that you joined this panel today and this discussion. All the best, and please stay tuned.